They say wealth is like palm wine, a little sweetens life, but too much poisons the soul. This is the tale of a mother who learned this truth too late. In the bustling city of Enugu, where ancient traditions mingled with modern ambitions, stood a mansion that seemed to touch the clouds. Behind its golden gates and marble floors lived Nedi, a woman whose wealth was matched only by her influence in the state. Her designer clothes whispered of luxury, and her very presence commanded respect in every room she entered. But of all her possessions, the fleet of luxury cars that gleamed in her garage, the priceless art that adorned her walls, the investments that multiplied her fortune daily, Nedi had one treasure that outshone them all: her only son, China. From the moment China drew his first breath, he was enveloped in a cocoon of opulence that few could imagine. His nursery wasn't just decorated, it was a masterpiece with walls painted in real gold accent. His baby clothes weren't simply expensive, they were handcrafted silk imported from the finest European fashion houses. Even his toys were curated with the same extravagant golden rattles and custom-made playthings that cost more than what most families earned in a year. As China grew, the mansion became his kingdom, and his mother, Nedi, its devoted queen. Every whim, every desire, every fleeting fancy was satisfied before he could even fully express it. The finest tutors were flown in to educate him, though their lessons often went unheeded. The most expensive gadgets filled his rooms, though they were frequently discarded for newer models. Cars appeared in the driveway on his birthday, each more luxurious than the last, though he had barely learned to drive. "My son deserves the best," Nedi would often declare, her voice carrying the weight of authority that came from being one of the wealthiest women in the state. Her words were always followed by the opening of her designer purse, the flash of her platinum credit cards, or the quick transfer of funds that could solve any material problem. But in this palace of privilege, one thing was conspicuously absent: discipline. The word itself seemed to bounce off the marble floors and disappear into the plush carpets, never finding a place to take root. Nedi's love for China was as boundless as her bank account, but it was a love that protected rather than prepared, that shielded rather than shaped. The staff who worked in the mansion, the maids, the gardeners, the drivers, watched with quiet concern as young China grew into his role as prince of this gilded kingdom. They saw the tantrums that were soothed with gifts, the misbehavior that was excused with money, and the growing sense of entitlement that seemed to expand with each passing day. In the grand halls of their mansion, mother and son moved like stars in their own universe, untouched by the normal rules that govern the lives of others. But as any astronomer knows, even stars, if they grow too large, too fast, without the right balance of forces, can collapse under their own weight. And in the heart of Enugu, behind those golden gates, the stage was being set for just such a collapse. The first cracks in China's character began to show on a sunny morning at his prestigious private school. At 10 years old, he had already developed a habit of arriving late, strolling into class with the casual confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. But on this particular day, when the principal dared to scold him for his tardiness, China's response would set in motion a pattern that would shape his future. Fury blazed in his young eyes as he stormed out of the principal's office. Without hesitation, he picked up a rock from the manicured school garden and hurled it through the principal's office window. The sound of shattering glass echoed across the quiet school grounds, a sharp crack that should have been a wake-up call. Within minutes, Nedi's luxury SUV came purring through the school gates. She emerged like a force of nature, her designer sunglasses worth more than the principal's monthly salary, her heels clicking against the polished tiles with military precision. The security guards and administrative staff seemed to shrink away as she swept past them, her presence filling the corridors like an approaching storm. "My son must have had a reason," she declared haughtily, standing in the principal's office, deliberately positioning herself between China and any consequences. The broken window behind the principal's desk let in a breeze that ruffled important papers, but Nedi paid it no mind. Her focus was solely on protecting her son. The principal, a man who had spent decades in education, tried to reason with her. "Madam Nedi," he began gently, "China needs guidance. We cannot allow him to continue doing as he pleases. This behavior..." "Are you trying to teach me how to be a mother?" Nedi's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You're only a principal in this school. That doesn't give you the right to tell me how to raise my son." Her voice grew sharper, each word a warning. The principal's shoulders sagged slightly as he realized the futility of his position. "Madam, I only speak because I care," he said softly. "But if you cannot see the danger ahead, then I have done my part." With a dramatic wave of her hand, Neddy turned on her heel and marched out, China following behind with a smirk playing on his lips. As they left the school grounds, he caught his reflection in his mother's car window and saw not shame or regret, but power. He had learned a valuable lesson that day, though not the one he should have. No matter what he did, his mother would shield him from consequences. That broken window became more than just property damage. It was the first visible crack in a pattern of behavior that would only grow more destructive with time. Each time China pushed a boundary, Neddy would be there, checkbook in hand, ready to smooth things over with money and influence, never realizing she was paving a path to disaster with her good intentions. Here's a 500-word narrative continuation focusing on China's escalating behavioral issues. The real darkness in China's behavior emerged one afternoon when his nanny, Soma, was helping him change out of his school uniform. As she turned to leave the room, China grabbed her breast and laughed, treating her dignity as just another toy he could play with. Soma's hand moved before she could think, leaving a sharp red mark across his face. "Never try such nonsense with me again," she warned, her voice trembling with anger and fear. But instead of showing remorse, China's face crumpled into practiced tears. His wails echoed through the marble halls of the mansion, summoning Neddy like a genie from her chambers. When Soma explained what had happened, expecting support for defending herself against such violation, Neddy's reaction left her stunned. "How dare you slap my son? Because he touched your breast." Neddy's palm cracked across Soma's face. "Are your breasts made of gold?" The words dripped with contempt. "The next time you lay a finger on my son will be the last time you're free to roam the earth." Soma stood frozen, her cheek burning, her dignity in shreds. She wanted to leave that moment, but the thought of her sick mother and younger sisters kept her chains firmly in place. For months, she endured China's increasingly bold advances, each incident met with his mother's fierce protection, until finally she found another job and escaped. But China's behavior only escalated. As he entered his teenage years, the mansion staff became a revolving door of nannies and housekeepers, each leaving with their own unspoken stories of harassment. His mother's wealth became his shield, her protection his license to treat people as disposable playthings. By 18, China had transformed into a creature of pure excess. Nights found him prowling the most exclusive clubs in Enugu, where he'd order entire bottles of champagne just to spray them across the room. His fleet of luxury cars grew as quickly as he could crash them, each accident dismissed by his mother with a wave of her hand and the words, "He's just a boy. Let him enjoy his youth." One particularly memorable night, he wrapped his latest sports car around a tree. The vehicle was a mangled mess of metal and leather, but China walked away without a scratch, protected once again by luck and money. The next day, Neddy simply replaced it with an even more expensive model, brushing aside concerns from her sister Lama about his reckless behavior. After all, Neddy would say, refilling his bank account without hesitation, "He's the heir to all my fortune. Why shouldn't he enjoy it now?" She watched with pride as he jetted off to whatever country caught his fancy, seeing his extravagance as a reflection of her success rather than the warning signs they truly were. Money flowed through China's fingers like water, but something darker was growing beneath his expensive exterior, a void that no amount of wealth could fill, a hunger that would soon seek satisfaction in ways that even his mother's money couldn't fix. China's charm became a weapon, one he wielded with practiced precision against vulnerable young women. Among them was Ifuna, a bright university student from a poor family who fell for his carefully crafted illusion of love. He showered her with attention and gifts, playing the role of devoted boyfriend until he had stolen what he wanted, her innocence. When she came to him, trembling with news of her pregnancy, his response shattered her world. He laughed in her face. "Get rid of it," he said coldly, as if discussing a minor inconvenience. Ifuna stood frozen, her dreams of their future crumbling around her. On her friend Sheta's advice, she gathered her courage to visit Neddy's mansion, hoping a mother would understand her plight. The guards initially blocked her entry, but fate intervened when Neddy's luxury SUV pulled up to the gates. Ifuna seized her chance, approaching the vehicle with desperate hope. Inside the opulent mansion, surrounded by wealth she'd never imagined, she poured out her story, tears flowing freely as she explained how China had deceived her. Nedi's response was ice cold. "Do you think you're the first girl to come here with your pathetic story?" she sneered, reaching into her designer purse. "You gold diggers are all the same." She flung a bundle of cash at Ifuna's feet. "Take this and get rid of that thing in your stomach." As security dragged Ifuna away, other women began emerging with similar stories, a trail of broken lives in China's wake. Each time, Nedi's response was the same: money thrown at the problem, threats made, victims silenced. But everything changed the night Yuchi stumbled to their gates, her clothes stained with blood. "He raped me," she sobbed, her voice breaking. Nedi's response was perhaps her most cruel yet. "Why did you make yourself available to my son? Is he the first to rape a woman? You cheap whores need to take your filthy selves away from my son." What Nedi didn't know was that Uchi wasn't just another vulnerable victim. She was the daughter of Chief Oko, one of the most powerful men in the country. As security roughly escorted Uchi from the property, the wheels of justice had already begun turning, powered by a force even Nedi's money couldn't stop. The next morning, when police officers swarmed the mansion to arrest China, Nedi's practiced routine of bribery and threats finally met its match. She pulled officers aside, offering astronomical sums to make the problem disappear. But this time her money held no power. The officers' refusal to accept her bribes sent Nedi into a panic. She frantically called every influential contact in her phone, but doors that had always opened for her suddenly remained firmly shut. What she didn't realize was that her son's latest victim had a father who understood something Nedi never had: that true power lay not in wealth, but in justice. What Nedi thought was just another problem to be solved with money was about to become the catalyst for their downfall. The interrogation room's harsh fluorescent lights cast unfamiliar shadows on Nedi's expensive makeup as she sat waiting, her manicured fingers drumming nervously on the metal table. When the door opened, her heart stopped. There stood Soma, her former nanny, now wearing the crisp uniform of a senior police officer, rank insignias gleaming on her shoulders. "Yes, Madam," Nedi, Soma said calmly, her voice carrying none of the timidity from her nanny days. "Do you remember me? Do you remember how you protected your son every time he violated me and every woman who came after me?" The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that Nedi could only stare, her mouth dry and wordless. Soma pulled out a small recorder and pressed play. Nedi's own voice filled the room. "How much do you want? Name your price. I'll double it, no, triple it, just let my son go." The words echoed off the concrete walls, each repetition another nail in her coffin. "The young girl your son assaulted," Soma continued, her voice sharp as steel. "Uchi is Chief Oko's daughter. Unlike you, he knows the value of justice. Your wealth can't save you this time, madam." The news spread through Enugu like wildfire. Billionaire's son arrested for rape, mother detained for bribery attempt, investors pulled out of Nedi's company overnight. The stock value plummeted. In the courthouse, the evidence was irrefutable: the recording of Nedi's bribe attempt, the testimonies of countless victims, including Soma's, painted a damning picture. China was sentenced to 25 years in prison, his designer clothes exchanged for a prison uniform. Nedi received 10 years for obstruction of justice and bribery. As she was led away in handcuffs, her expensive jewelry offered no protection against the harsh glares of the public. Her empire crumbled like a house of cards in a storm. Inside the prison, China faced a reality he'd never known. No amount of charm or family wealth could protect him from the consequences of his actions. The guards showed him no special treatment, and his fellow inmates had their own way of dealing with men like him. Meanwhile, Nedi's cell was a far cry from her marble-floored mansion. The concrete walls closed in around her, and her once immaculate appearance faded like an old photograph. Her company collapsed, her assets were seized, and her name became synonymous with disgrace. 10 years passed slowly. When Nedi was finally released, she emerged into a world that had moved on without her. Her mansion had been sold, her wealth dissolved, her influence evaporated like morning dew. The streets of Enugu, which had once parted before her luxury cars, now felt hostile and foreign. She found refuge in her sister's modest home, a shadow of her former self. The weight of her failures pressed down on her shoulders as she visited China in prison. seeing her once pampered son thin and broken behind the bulletproof glass. For the first time, both mother and son faced the truth that their actions had consequences, and no amount of money could buy back what they had lost. After 25 years, China emerged from prison into a world he barely recognized. At 45, his once handsome face was weathered, his hands calloused from prison labor. The gleaming city of Enugu had transformed during his absence, its skyline dotted with new towers that made him feel like a stranger in his hometown. Day after day he pounded the pavements searching for work, but his past followed him like a shadow. Each potential employer's face would change the moment they saw his criminal record, doors closing before he could even explain himself. He lived with his aged mother in her sister's small house, a far cry from the mansion of his youth. Then one afternoon, exhausted and desperate, he saw a sign outside a gleaming glass building. Cleaners wanted apply within the marble-floored lobby reminded him painfully of his former life, but he swallowed his pride and approached the receptionist. To his surprise, they hired him. China threw himself into his work, scrubbing floors and cleaning windows with a dedication that surprised even himself. For the first time in his life, he understood the dignity of honest labor. Then came the day that changed everything. While mopping the executive floor, he saw a familiar face in a portrait on the wall. His mop clattered to the floor as he stared at Ifuna's photograph. She wasn't the scared university student anymore, but a powerful CEO. Beside her stood a handsome young man around 25, their son, he realized with a jolt. The son he had never known. Fate had a bitter sense of irony. He was now cleaning floors in the company owned by the woman whose life he had tried to destroy. When Ifuna finally confronted him in her office, the power dynamic had shifted completely. She was now the one sitting behind the expensive desk, while he stood in his cleaner's uniform, humbled and ashamed. But destiny wasn't finished with them. One stormy night, their son Obina collapsed in his office, suffering from sudden kidney failure. China, still working late, found him and rushed him to the hospital. When doctors announced they needed a donor, China didn't hesitate. Test me. Take whatever you need, just save my son. The surgery was successful, and as both father and son recovered in adjacent hospital rooms, the walls built by decades of pain began to crumble. Ifuna, seeing China's sacrifice, found her anger giving way to something more complex. You saved him, she whispered, standing between their hospital beds. After everything, you saved our son. Obina, learning the truth about his donor, began visiting China regularly. They built a cautious relationship, bridging the gap of 25 lost years. China never returned to cleaning floors. Ifuna made him a maintenance supervisor instead. While they never rekindled their romantic relationship, they found a different kind of peace. In the end, China's redemption came not through grand gestures or declarations, but through simple acts, honest work, a father's sacrifice, and the humble acceptance of a past that couldn't be changed but could be forgiven. In the years that followed, the marble halls of Ifuna's company became a place of healing, where 3 generations of a broken family slowly rebuilt their bonds. Obina, now fully recovered from his surgery, made it a habit to have lunch with China every Wednesday in the company cafeteria. Their conversations, initially awkward and hesitant, grew into deep discussions about life, business, and second chances. China, no longer the entitled youth who thought the world owed him everything, found peace in his simple life. His maintenance supervisor position gave him purpose, and he treated every employee with the respect he had once denied others. The same hands that had once carelessly damaged lives now worked to maintain and repair, a fitting metaphor for his transformed soul. Neddy, watching from the sidelines, saw in her son the man he could have become years ago if she had been a different kind of mother. Her own transformation was perhaps the most profound, from a woman who thought money could solve everything to someone who understood that true wealth lay in character and accountability. During one family gathering at Ifuna's home, Neddy finally found the courage to speak the words she had held back for years. I failed as a mother, she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I thought I was protecting you, China, but I was destroying you instead. Every time I shielded you from consequences, I was teaching you that your actions didn't matter. Ifuna, who had built an empire from the ashes of her pain, shared her own parenting philosophy. When I raised Obina, I made sure he understood that privilege comes with responsibility. Every advantage he received was balanced with accountability. That's why he grew into a man who lifts others up instead of tearing them down. The lessons of their story echoed beyond their family. In Enugu's business circles, Ifuna became known not just for her success but for her compassion, a leader who understood that power without mercy becomes tyranny. Her company's culture reflected this, creating opportunities for those seeking second chances. Obinna, shaped by both his mother's wisdom and his father's redemption, carried these lessons into his own leadership role. He often told young executives, "Our true character isn't shown in how we treat those above us, but in how we treat those who work under us." As for China, his greatest teaching came through his daily interactions with the cleaning staff he once supervised. He treated them with a dignity that spoke of someone who had learned life's hardest lessons. "Every person deserves respect," he would say, "because we never know their full story." The story of their family became a whispered lesson in Enugu's social circles, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked privilege, but also a testament to the power of redemption. It proved that while wealth could buy comfort, it couldn't buy character, and that true parenting meant preparing children for the consequences of their actions, not protecting them from them. In the end, their story taught that forgiveness, while never easy, could build bridges across the deepest chasms, and that it's never too late to become the person you should have been all along. In the heart of Enugu, 3 mansions stood as silent witnesses to the saga that had unfolded over the decades. First was Nedi's former estate, its golden gates now weathered, serving as a cautionary monument to the dangers of wealth without wisdom. Second was the prison where China had spent 25 years, its cold walls teaching lessons that his mother's money never could. And third was Ifuna's corporate tower, gleaming with the promise of redemption, where a family's broken pieces had finally found their way back together. Their story whispered through the city's streets, carried on the winds of time, teaching lessons that money couldn't buy. It spoke of how Nedi's enabling love, though wrapped in designer clothes and sealed with platinum credit cards, had been a poison disguised as protection. Every time she had shielded China from consequences, she had stripped away another layer of his humanity, until all that remained was a sense of invulnerability that eventually became his prison. The tale echoed in parent-teacher meetings across Enugu schools, where mothers and fathers learned that true love sometimes meant stepping back, allowing children to stumble, fall, and learn from their mistakes. The principal who had tried to warn Nedi all those years ago became a symbol of unheeded wisdom, his broken office window a metaphor for the shattered lives that followed. In corporate boardrooms, Ifuna's story became a masterclass in the power of accountability. Her success, built from the ashes of rejection and hardship, demonstrated how adversity, when faced with dignity, could forge strength of character that no amount of inherited wealth could match. Her son Obinna, raised with both privilege and responsibility, became living proof that wealth need not corrupt if balanced with wisdom. The prison years carved the deepest lessons into China's soul. Each day behind bars stripped away another layer of entitlement, replacing it with hard-earned humility. His transformation from a man who took whatever he wanted to one who gave his own kidney to save his son spoke to the power of redemption, not as a single moment of change, but as a journey of thousands small choices made differently. Perhaps the most powerful theme emerged in the contrast between 2 paths of parenting. Nedi's approach, paving her son's way with gold but leading him to ruin, stood in stark contrast to Ifuna's method of building character through balanced love and discipline. Their divergent results played out in their children, China's fall and imprisonment versus Obinna's rise to respected leadership. In the end, their story became a mirror for society, reflecting the complex relationship between privilege and character. It showed how wealth, like water, could either nourish growth or erode foundations, depending on how it was channeled. It proved that true redemption required more than regret. It demanded action, sacrifice, and the courage to rebuild from ruins. The 3 buildings still stand in Enugu today: the empty mansion, the prison, and the corporate tower, each a chapter in a story that teaches us that while we cannot change our past, we can always choose our response to it. And in those choices lies the power to transform not just ourselves, but generations to come.